You're just scrolling through your timeline, and suddenly, something catches your eye. A comment or a clip. 2 seconds in, something tightens in your chest. You know exactly what this feeling is. You've seen this type of content 100 times. You know it was designed to make you feel exactly this way. You can name the manipulation while it's happening to you. This can happen offline as well. Someone says something at the dinner table. One careless comment, not even directed at you, and suddenly the whole evening changes. You stop being fully present. The comment keeps replaying, and you spend the next hour having a conversation in your head that the other person isn't even aware of. You still can't scroll past it. You can't let it go. And here's the thing, that's not weak willpower or poor self-control. What's actually happening inside your brain in that moment is far more interesting than most people realize. Let's start with the body, because that's where this begins. When something provokes you, online or offline, your brain doesn't take a moment to assess the situation. It reacts instantly. The amygdala, the part of your brain responsible for detecting threats, processes that emotional signal in approximately 12 milliseconds, faster than you can decide how to feel. In that fraction of a second, stress hormones flood your system with cortisol and adrenaline. Your body is now in full alert mode, not because you're in danger, but because your nervous system doesn't yet know the difference between a physical threat and a provocative caption on a screen. Harvard-trained brain scientist Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor spent years researching this moment. Her finding was precise. The physiological component of an emotional reaction, the actual chemistry of anger, runs its full course in the body in about 90 seconds. Not the rest of your day, only 90 seconds, and the chemicals have peaked and begun to clear. So why does it last so much longer? Because after the trigger, you pick up the story. You start replaying what you saw or what happened to you. You imagine what you would have said, rehearsing comebacks. If it's online, you scroll to the comments to see if other people are as offended as you are. You look for confirmation that your reaction was justified. And every time you return to that loop, your brain reads it as a new trigger and releases another wave of the same chemicals. The cycle keeps running. The content may have made you angry, but it didn't keep you angry. Your relationship with the content did. Here's where it stops being just biology and becomes something more deliberate. Someone built a system around the 90 seconds, not to help it pass, to extend it. A 2024 study from the Knight Columbia Institute found that engagement-based algorithms consistently push emotionally charged, hostile content higher in the feed, even when users say that content makes them feel worse. Because the algorithm isn't optimizing for truth, usefulness, or even happiness. It's optimizing for attention. And anger is one of the most reliable ways to hold it. The more outrage gets engagement, the more the system feeds it back into the cycle. Rage bait was named Oxford University Press's Word of the Year for 2025. Its usage tripled in just 12 months. That acceleration isn't accidental. It's the output of a system that has run millions of experiments on human emotional response and learned one consistent truth. Anger keeps people on the platform longer than almost anything else. For younger generations, especially Gen Z and millennials, who grew up with this running in the background of their daily lives, this conditioning started early. Their nervous systems were calibrated on a media environment where the most extreme reaction was always the most rewarded signal. By the time many of them could name what was happening, the pattern was already embedded. But here's where it gets more personal than most people want to admit. There's a concept in psychology around what anger is actually protecting. Researchers who study emotional response have noted for decades that anger rarely arrives alone. Underneath it, almost always, is something softer. Something that felt too vulnerable to sit with. Hurt, fear, shame. A sense of being disrespected or excluded. Anger is faster. It feels stronger. It moves outward instead of inward. So the nervous system reaches for it almost automatically, the way you might reach for a door that's always been there in the dark. Think about what's actually happening in the moment. A comment implies you're naive. A video mocks something you believe in. The first thing that moves through you isn't fury. It's something quieter, something close to being seen in a way you didn't choose. Then anger arrives half a second later, and suddenly, it's much easier to carry. So when something online touches a nerve, the first emotion isn't really anger. Anger is what shows up to cover for the feeling underneath, to protect something that didn't feel safe enough to show. The content creators who are best at rage baiting understand this, even if they've never read a psychology paper. They don't just provoke. They target something specific, your sense of identity, your values, your group. Because when something feels like an attack on who you are, not just what you think, the emotional charge is exponentially higher. Because suddenly, there's more at stake. The body responds accordingly. And when your outrage gets rewarded, likes, replies, people agreeing with you, your brain treats that as social approval. It feels good. It feels validating. And that's exactly why the cycle becomes addictive. You're not just reacting anymore. Your brain starts learning that anger gets attention, connection, and reward. But here's the part most people never notice. When something triggers you, online or at the dinner table, it usually isn't only about what's in front of you. The comments that feel like a personal attack, even when they weren't directed at you, the opinions that make you feel something close to rage, tend to connect to existing wounds, something previously unresolved, a value that was threatened before, an identity that was dismissed somewhere earlier in life. The content didn't create the wound, it just found it. And when something finds an existing wound with precision, the nervous system doesn't respond to the present moment. It responds to every time that wound was opened before. This is why the same type of content can feel neutral to one person and completely destabilizing to another. It isn't about the content's inherent power. It's about what it's landing on. People who seem completely unbothered by content that would rattle most people aren't suppressing their emotions. They're not cold or indifferent or performing calm. Something different is happening for them neurologically. They've developed the ability, usually through deliberate attention, not natural temperament, to notice the emotional response arising without immediately becoming it. Not, I am furious, but I notice something in me is responding to this. That half second of distance between the trigger and the full emotional response is where the loop either begins or doesn't. And no, it's not a comfortable space. It takes practice to find it. But it exists in every person, because the biology of the 90-second window means the choice point is always there, between the chemical surge and the story you decide to attach to it. The most powerful thing you can do in that window isn't fight the anger down. It's to get genuinely curious about it. What is this actually about? What did this content touch that was already there? Because the answer to that question is almost never about the post. And it's almost never about the person at the dinner table either. The person who baited you isn't in your chest right now. The algorithm that served you the content has already moved on to the next user. What stays is what you carry forward. The cortisol still circulating, the story still running, the afternoon that quietly disappeared into a comment section that never needed your presence. There's a version of you that watches those 90 seconds pass and just keeps scrolling. Not because you're indifferent, not because you don't care, but because you've learned to recognize the difference between something that genuinely requires your attention and something that was designed to feel that way. That version of you isn't emotionless. It just stopped giving every stranger, every comment, and every algorithm control over the rest of the day.